This is Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Ochre Fest 2021, and I am your host this year, Robert Chafe. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that we are meeting in downtown St. John's, Utamcook today, which has become known as the island of Newfoundland, which is of course the ancestral homeland of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq people. I also want to acknowledge the first peoples of Labrador, the Innu of Nitassinan and the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and the Inuit of Nunatuavut. We are incredibly grateful to live, work, and gather in this place, and we want to thank the original and continued caretakers of this land. And I am delighted to welcome and very excited to welcome my guests today. Saqaman Misoljo is the author of Muninjij Becomes a Man and an Aboriginal Chief's Journey. He has been the district traditional chief of Mi'kmaq First Nation since 1983, appointed by late Grand Chief Donald Marshall. Misoljo is considered the spiritual chief of the Mi'kmaq of Newfoundland and Labrador. Welcome, sir. And Sheila O'Neill is from Kippens, Newfoundland, and is a member of the Halapu Mi'kmaq First Nation. She is a drum carrier and carries many teachings passed down by respected elders. As a founding member and past president of the Newfoundland Aboriginal Women's Network, she has been a part of a grassroots movement of empowerment of Indigenous women within the island portion of Newfoundland and Labrador, and she lives in St. John's. Welcome. And I'd love to start with a reading from my Indian, if you'd be so kind.
Sure. Okay. So Robert, I've chosen to read chapter 9, The Journey Begins. Okay. At the end of our 150-mile walk to Plezantec, which he called Placentia, I thought that it might be clear to Cormac that I was honest and honorable, and that I'd done what he wanted. Cormac looked at me and said, "I'll meet you in a couple of weeks at Newman's." He did not invite me to his house, so I went back to my campsite from earlier in July when I first reached St. John's. 2 weeks later, when I met him in St. John's, Cormac came to me and informed me that we must prepare to leave, as it was now the end of August. As Cormac turned away, he asked if I was okay with that, but he kept on walking without waiting for my answer. I spoke anyway and said, "Maybe we should have left earlier. We wasted time walking across Placentia to see if I was capable of guiding you across the island." Cormac turned and said, "Did you say something, Indian?" "Yes," I said. "Maybe we should have gone much earlier to Random Sound. Leaving this late, we may well run into bad weather and be forced to go south to avoid it." "No," said Cormac. "We go now at the end of this month. I want to find the Beothuk campsite sooner rather than later." I felt that Cormac hoped he would find their camp early on in our journey and would not have to go all the way across the island. By the next morning, Cormac was ready. "Here's the equipment that we are going to need," he said, thinking I was going to correct him. I said I have my own gun, my own axe, my own blanket, my own bundle, which I used to walk the 200 miles to get here. Whatever food we need, we can bring with us, and along the way we can shoot wild geese, shoot ducks, catch fish, and we can even shoot a nice fat halibu. Now we're ready, Alglazio. We left St. John's by schooner at the end of August and headed for Trinity Bay to start our journey across the island, which would take many days of hard walking. On our way up the east coast, I spent most of my time standing at the rail of the ship watching the coastline go by. I felt a deep sense of loneliness, missing my family back in Mi'kmaq, and remembering the last conversation I had with my elders. Was I taking this man to find the Beothuk? And if by chance we came across their campsite, would Cormac shoot to defend us if attacked? I'm sure Cormac would be called a hero, and me, the lone Indian, would take the blame for such a deed. The white man's laws would not believe me and my side of the story. During this time, Cormac never spoke to me or acknowledged me in any way. As the coastline slipped past the ship, Cormac would sketch pictures in his book and write his words. On August 30th, we sailed back past Conception Bay and on past Baccalieu Island. On this island, like many other islands around Newfoundland, eggers, men who collected seabird eggs, would show up in small boats and schooners. The men would carry off boatloads of newly laid eggs and take all the eggs they could find, not thinking about the survival of those birds. I thought back to being on the land with my grandfather. Many times we would gather the eggs from seagulls and other birds like geese and ducks. We never took more than 1 or 2 eggs from each nest, leaving the nest as we had done for hundreds of years, and our food source remained healthy. On August 31st, we arrived in Bonaventure, a small fishing harbor on the west side of Trinity Bay. It was here in this small harbor that Cormac asked for information about the interior and engaged a local fisherman with a small skiff to take us to Random Sound. As in other places in Newfoundland, no one had any information. They did not normally go very far from the salt water for firewood and boat-building materials for their fishing boats. Some of the people in the harbor said there was fear that the savages would kill them and steal their women and children. Cormac pointed to me and said, "I'm traveling with my Indian. He will protect me. Have you seen any of the Beothuk that you are so afraid of?" "No," was the response. "We only hear stories about such things." I heard a low voice say, "Shoot the savages on sight, sir, and be careful of the savage with you. He might slit your throat while you sleep." Cormac did not respond to that remark and just walked away. Cormac decided that we would go inland as far as the smaller boat could go, avoiding the long walk overland. The overland hike would take at least 6 or 7 days over rough land and high wooded hills. The boat would take us to the west part of Random Sound. On September 3rd, we left Bonaventure aboard the skiff with 2 local fishermen. We expected to travel to the southwest for at least 6 miles. As we drew closer to the shallow end of the sound at Random Bar, we saw evidence of the white man who came to this area to peel the bark from the balsam fir. They used it on their flakes to cover their cod while it was drying. I've seen my own people peel balsam fir, but for a different purpose. In the springtime, when the sap started to run, large pieces of bark were taken from the trees, and we would lay the bark on the ground with rocks on top to keep them flat. When dried, the bark could be used to cover our tilts or wigwams in the summertime as a temporary shelter. Over the summer, the tops of these trees would turn red, and the wood would be cut in late fall for firewood. Along the way, I noticed that there was an abundance of birch bark, which we used for building ocean-going guidons. I pointed this out to Cormac and said, "Our people gather this bark to build our guidons. The Beothuk use this same bark for their guidons, and they travel long distances offshore to Funk Island and other islands to gather eggs, which, like our own people, is a very important part of their winter food supply." Our boat lay dry on the bar all night, and Cormac insisted that we sleep on the small boat that night. I was thinking, why not set up camp on shore where we could have a fire and make tea and hot food? I think maybe Cormac was afraid to leave the safety of his white friends, and then he might be having second thoughts about the long, hard journey ahead. After spending the night with Cormac and his friends in a small boat, sleeping on bare boards, I longed to be in the woods with a fire.
Beautiful. Thank you. I just love this book so much. It's just, congratulations on it. It's gorgeous. And it's just beautiful reclamation of this man all but lost to history, as we were discussing before we started taping. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the impetus to do this book and how this creative process between you worked.
Well, I guess the idea of doing this with me started a long time ago. And when I keep asking about Sylvester or Sylvester Joe or Joe Sylvester, which was a name that was pretty adamant by Ingeborg Marshall, who said, well, it wasn't Sylvester Joe, it was Joe Sylvester.
Right.
And there was, and there still is, people named Sylvester by their last name in Nova Scotia. But we all agree, and even Engelbert Marshall agree, that the name of Sylvester Joe, or Joe Sylvester, did live in Conn River, and in Conn River there was Joe's, and that's where he came from when he came to meet with Cormac. So over the years, I've talked to many people about that, and even was involved with the Biotic Institute at one time, and because the commission of the statute as a now in Boyd's Cove was run by the Biotic Institute. At one meeting, I'd asked, why don't we go to Scotland to, go after the remains of those two individuals that was taken by Cormac? Nobody wanted to do it. And finally, in 2014, I believe, or something, I decided that that's something I want to do. But at the same time, I want to write about Sylvester Joe, not knowing anything about him. I want to give him a voice. I want to bring him into this recent history of ours, so that our own children would know the story, and that the Newfoundland children would know the story of Cormac 200 years ago, and with a person that he refers to as my Indian.
Right.
And if someone that said call me my Indian today, I would probably hit them one.
It's a provocative title. I understand what you're doing in terms of the reclamation, but it's a provocative title, yeah.
Absolutely. We then Sheila came back from the Middle East, and she was at a powwow, and I said, by the way, Sheila, I'm writing a book. I want to write a book about Sylvester Joe. One of my relatives that walked with Cormac 200 years ago. And lo and behold, I don't know if she knew what she was getting in for, mind you, but she said yes.
No, I did not.
So she showed up at my house, and we sat down, and I told her what I wanted to do, and asked her again, sure you want to do this? Absolutely. I think we put together an outline that afternoon, and that later became the book. But we worked on that for 4 years or something like that.
Wow.
Little bits and pieces, and difficult at times, because Sheila live here in St. John's, and I'm in Conn River, and I hate computers with a passion. And my one time in a day that I'm not to be disturbed by anyone, I'm watching Coronation Street for half an hour. So Sheila, you got to live with that.
Little known facts about Chief Michel Joe. That's great. We're getting the inside story.
Absolutely. It started in the 60s when, of course, it's been on a long time.
Right.
And it's a relaxing time. I don't take phone calls. I tell my families, if you're going to show up to visit me, after Coronation Street.
So there was no writing in the evening until after that was over.
And Sheila we had worked out a schedule that, and of course, she been on a computer all day, and so was I at work, and so I didn't feel like going on the computer at night and doing the work we needed to have done. It was just a simple thing we had to do that night. And you can't ask me a question, because I'll tell you a story. And it don't matter what you ask me, I'll end up telling you a story anyway. So this particular night, I know she must have been tired. I didn't want to be on a computer, and I think it was only a simple question of yes or no. And so she asked me the question, and I went on and on and on with this story, and I happened to take a good look at her face. And if I could say what's on her face, it wasn't a good job. Good job. Get it over with. Get it over with. Answer the damn question.
I can't believe you take every opportunity to tell that story. You throw me right under the bus. I was actually, at one point after he's storytelling and then he's speaking Mi'kmaq, and I'm thinking, oh my God, people would pay thousands of dollars to be having this experience that I'm having right now. But I guess my face didn't register that. And called out for it.
So you spoke, you listened, and the writing and the story emerged from that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful. And you were saying before we started taping that anyone who knows the Chief reading this book, you'd get his sense of humor, his...
Absolutely. Yeah. Friends who know Chief very well say that when they're reading, they hear his voice. And that was something that was really important, I think, to preserve, was Chief's voice. Mm-hmm. If I had taken the story and, it was a collaboration without a doubt, and but it was really important to make sure that it came from, he had the story in his head. He carried it for a long time. When I asked him to tell me what he wanted to do, I sat down with a pen and paper, and he had the entire outline just perfectly, chapter by chapter. So then it was fill in the gaps, right?
Right.
So
Sylvester's he's a really interesting character in terms of that relationship with Cormac is really, really fascinating. One of the great ironies of the book, of course, is that he's hired as a guide by Cormac for presumably his knowledge of the land and presumably to keep Cormac safe and on track across the province. But yet at every turn, Cormac dismisses that knowledge,
yes.
dismisses that practical and spiritual knowledge that Sylvester Joe is offering him. I get the hint that in the book that Cormac comes to some sense of humility around that. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely.
Does he? Yeah.
Absolutely. At one time, the evening Cormac journey, he refers to Sylvester as a coward because he leaves him overnight and to his own whatever's going to happen. But he simply went looking for the campsite where he saw the smoke from, not to do anything else or run away or hide away, as Cormac says in his journey, in his journal. And I wanted to correct that because that was important. He was trying to fulfill the wishes of his elders, not to show Cormac where the Beothuk people was. And there was one way to find out for sure is to spend the night with the Mi'kmaq family, talk about the Beothuk people, and to see if they in fact knew anything, and if they did, not to tell Cormac. And of course, at that time, they're all speaking Mi'kmaq.
Right.
So they had to translate for Cormac anyway. So he never got a story out of them that he wanted.
Right. And in your version of the story, because it's really the only one we have from Sylvester's point of view, why did he do this? What was it to honor the elders' wishes of I guess making sure that Cormac didn't find the Beothuk people, or was there a sense of duty to protect this man even though he was?
Well, both, I would think.
Yeah.
Because he took on a contract for what he got paid for. I don't know, not very little probably, but he also had an obligation that comes from elders that says, listen, this was 200 years ago, and there were still small pockets of Beothuk people around. Everybody knew that. And nobody didn't know Cormac, whether or not he was going to do the same things that the Paytons had done. They would find them and they would kill them, and the people that Sylvester spoke to didn't want to have that on their conscience, because when you look at our history, we've been blamed for the demise of the Beothuk people anyway. So what the elders would say, don't show Cormac. If you know where they are, if you find them, don't show them. And he followed that truthfully and honestly, but at the same time, he did his job by showing Cormac how to get across Newfoundland safely. So in his mind, he was doing both honors to both groups of people, to elders and to Cormac.
He displays a tremendous amount of care to Cormac, even though Cormac, from the reader's perspective, I would argue, doesn't really seem to deserve it. He's so dismissive of his knowledge. But it's a really beautiful character study of this man and that line of duty to the elders and to Cormac. It's really lovely. You mentioned this a little bit earlier, your work in the repatriation of Damaz DeWitt and her husband's remains. I wonder if you could, and I bring it up because they actually talk a little bit about it in the book, at the back of the book. And there is a thread through the book, as you were just discussing, about the relationship between the Mi'kmaq people and the Beothuk people. Could you talk a little bit about that work and any future work in that regard that you see still being necessary, that you are involved in?
Well, I guess the hard part to me was to finally decide I'm going to do this.
Right.
Without consultation with anyone. Matter of fact, I didn't know who to consult with. So I decided I would, first I would get in touch with them, and I sent them information of who I was. I didn't want them to think there was some nut from Newfoundland coming to visit.
Right.
But I sent a message through the curator, and then I decided I was going to Scotland. I was going to the museum and asked the question, could I have those remains taken back to Newfoundland from where they were stolen? And I was told that that the remains is not in this building. We can't take them out. We can't bring them here. You can't see them. But they knew, full well why I was there. So I stayed for 3 or 4 days, going back to the museum every day, talking to people, and never did see the remains at all. And the day before I left, I think I went back to the museum one more time, and I talked to the same people, and I said, I'm sorry I didn't get to see the remains, but those remains were stolen from Newfoundland by William Cormack, and they belong to Newfoundland. They don't necessarily belong to me. They belong to all of us in Newfoundland. And the story is so dark and black that we need to do something to fix that. And this is one way of doing it. And he said, well, no, I'm sorry, but you just can't show up and see the remains. I said, well, I'm coming back next year. And I jokingly said that if I don't see them, I'm going to dig up Bobby Burns and take him home for study. And I left.
I laughed out loud when I read that in the book. Very funny.
And they never cracked a smile when I said it, of course. And the following year, I went back, and I did see the remains at that stage. And it was an incredible moment in my life. There was 6 or 7 people in this tiny little room, and I asked them, could I be alone with the remains and do my prayers? He said, no, we don't allow that. I said, well, then maybe one of you could stay. I'm not going to steal them. I'm not going to do anything. And they decided that, yeah, everybody else could go, but one person could stay in the room with me. And they had white gloves on, and they wanted me to wear white gloves. I said, I'm not wearing no white gloves. And anyway, there was sweetgrass there. Somebody had been there before, obviously, left sweetgrass. So I did a sweetgrass ceremony. Mm. And I asked them, can I touch the skulls? And they said, no. And I said, good. Then I touched the skulls anyway. But it was an incredible moment because it was like almost like a shock going through my body, and a deep sense of hurt and pain and emotions. And I actually started to cry. Mm. And I'll never forget that moment. It was like a moment in time when my son passed away when he was 8 years old. It was that kind of pain that hit your body, that something drastic happened, and it was terrible, and it's still there, still within those skulls that was taken. So that was a part of the repatriation. And then when I got back to Newfoundland, I started talking to government and anyone that would listen. And through Private Members Bill, under Denny Williams' government, Tracy Perry put forward a Private Members Bill to have those remains brought back to Newfoundland, and then followed up by the Ball government, and then on through until finally the federal government got involved and they were brought back to Newfoundland. And it was an incredible moment to have them in Newfoundland. They're still here at the rooms, and I haven't seen them yet, but that's being worked on. And where they go from here, I don't know. That's something that we're still working on with government too as well. Right. I don't think they could ever go back on the land of where they come from, because they're so famous as remains, and the story is so well known that I don't think they would last very long. Right. It would be a sin to put them back in the ground anyway, without having them protected in some way.
Thank you so much for that work, and thank you for that story. It's really moved me when I read it as well. I wish we had more time, because I could talk to you, sir, all day long. Thank you so much for the book, and thank you for this chat today. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for tuning into Ochre Fest 2021. We're going to leave you today with a song from Rube Rake.
We're Rube Rake, and this song's called Pick It Up. I won't go picking it up. The weight of the page is just too much. I won't be hanging around. The weight of your love has got me down. In the kitchen, nothing's changed, few things missing, still the same, almost the same. I won't be tending that field. The year's neglect won't let it heal. Found that electrical box. The fuses have blown, but that don't stop wine from flowing. Old hens chirp, fire's going, garden's old, overgrown. The old place is vacant, it ain't testing my patience. Still bread on the table, the neighbors come round, and they don't believe it, how I still conceive it. It's been holding me over, with you not around. I won't go picking it up. The weight of the page is just too much.
The following program is brought to you by Rogers Anyplace TV. Enjoy exclusive content for